Hey, everybody. Hope everybody's had a good week and everybody got out of the cold okay. It got down to below zero here, had some pipes freeze, but other than that, everything's thawed back out. So I hope everybody made it through. I am going to be talking a little bit with you tonight about language, and we're going to have a little bit of fun with it. As soon as I find my paper that I just laid down, we're going to talk about a particular there was an incident that occurred back in the 90s. You may just have to pull it up. I just had it. Oh, here it is. There was an incident that occurred back in the 90s. I don't know how many people remember this. And it was President Bill Clinton. And President Bill Clinton was impeached. And during the impeachment, folks just assumed he lied. And they called him Slick Willie. They called him Teflon Bill. And they said that he just talked his way out of things. Now, a lot of things were given to us during this particular, we'll call it scandal. And let's look real quick, because I know we've got a lot of listeners out there, folks who are going to be listening to this this later, who are going to be wondering, who this Bill Clinton guy was. Of course, everybody knows him. He's Hillary Clinton's husband, but he started out as a president. Well, he's a governor down in Arkansas. And while he was a governor down in Arkansas, he got into a little bit of a mess down there. So let's look up Bill Clinton scandal. And he had an intern named Monica Lewinsky. But during the whole impeachment thing, there was another thing going on where he got accused of sexual harassment during his time in Arkansas, the Paula Jones case. So I'm just going to bring this up. I'm going to do screen sharing real quick so folks can see this. So this was a scandal, and they call it a sex scandal because anytime you put the word sex into something, it gets everybody's attention, right? And this was one of the things at the time that was supposed to be entertaining everybody. We live in a world of Roman Colosseums and NFL football and all kinds of Panamint circenses, bread and circuses. So they like to keep us entertained with bread and circuses. But during the bread and circuses, they often tell us things that are very key if we know how to hear them. I don't know if all you folks recognize this, but most of the folks more than half of the people who have been president have also been attorneys. That should tell you something about our political system. If I think out of over 40 presidents, something like 29 or so, 26, 27 have been attorneys. That is revealing. And what do attorneys do? Attorneys learn how to speak a language called legalese. So here we have the Clinton Lewinsky scandal. And it was Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky. Monica Lewinsky was just a young intern. And being a young intern in the White House and having access to the president, she was probably a prime target for exploitation. Whether what actually happened behind closed doors, I don't know. But we're just going to read a little bit on what happened with his impeachment. So Clinton ended so supposedly they had a relationship, and they call it a sexual relationship in Wikipedia. Wikipedia, take it with a grain of salt. And it lasted between 1995 and 1997. I was actually in the military during the Clinton administration, so it was an interesting time. He ended a televised speech in late January 1988 with the later infamous statement, "I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky." And everything kind of built off that, right? Further investigation led to charges of perjury. Okay, we're going to be talking about what perjury is, because if you ever get in court and you're on the stand, you could be accused of committing perjury if you don't tell the truth, but you have to know what perjury is, right? And to the impeachment of Clinton in 1998. Now, just because someone is impeached, impeachment is like receiving charges to remove a public official from office. And just because they get impeached, it's just like if you get an indictment. Just because you get an indictment doesn't mean you're guilty, doesn't mean you go to jail, all right? So he was impeached in 1998 by the U.S. House of Representatives. Later, he was acquitted on all impeachment charges of perjury and obstruction of justice in a 21-day Senate trial. And of course, they made a big circus out of that. They said that he was held in civil contempt by federal judge Susan Weber Wright for giving misleading testimony in the Paula Jones case. Paula Jones was the one who sued him while he was president for sexual harassment. Now, this was a very bad thing, not so much for the president, Bill Clinton at the time, but for Monica Lewinsky. This pretty much ruined her life, I think. I don't know that for certain. I know that she's received a lot of bad press and she's had to be very private since then. Okay, so let's look into this just a little bit. Okay, so what is perjury? Okay, so he said that he did not have sexual relations with that woman. Now everybody said, oh, we know he's lying. Okay, but actually, I believe that he did not lie. I don't think he ever told a lie while he was up there. How is that? Okay. Well, what is perjury? Let's do a little brushing up on what perjury is. Okay. So perjury has 4 elements. I'm going to read it and then we're going to break the elements down. It's knowingly making a false statement about material facts while under oath. What are the 4 elements? Knowingly, you have to know you're doing it. Make a false statement about material facts while under oath. Okay. So it's not perjury if what you're saying you believe is true. All right. It also isn't perjury if what you're lying about is not what you're under oath about. So if you're ever told you cannot tell anything, you can't lie on the stand, well, you shouldn't probably. I'm not advising anybody to tell a lie on the stand. But in order for it to be perjurious, I think that's how you say that. Perjurious, perjury, Perjurus, perjury. Perjurious, it has to be a lie that is about the material facts. Okay. Now the Supreme Court, and this is a quote, has ruled that it's okay for, quote, a wily witness to succeed in derailing the questioner so long as the witness speaks the literal truth. Now, listen to that. The Supreme Court recognizes that there may be a witness that is wily. What does wily mean? Well, a little bit a little harder to pin down. Think of trying to catch a pig. Now think of greasing the pig up. A wily, greased pig. You can't get a hold of it, right? And in order for us to communicate, we have to have a two-way understanding that they're the same words. And we've talked about this before, but it does no good for me to say horse when you're picturing chicken. You know, when I say the word horse, everybody has to picture the same animal in order for communication to occur. Okay. Also, you're also off the hook for perjury if in a subsequent statement in the same proceeding, you correct what might otherwise be a perjurious statement. So courts go by last in, first out. It's an accounting method called LIFO. There's first in, first out FIFO. There's last in, first out LIFO. Whatever's on top is what comes out first. Okay. So if you want to know the status of a case, you see what was most recently filed. All right. Now, here's the thing. Paula Jones lawyers got involved with this case. And the reason, let me back up here. The reason we're going over this is not to understand the Bill Clinton supposed sex scandal. We're going over this to understand the words that were used, what then President Bill Clinton said, and what they were trying to prove, and why I don't think that he never told a lie during this entire thing. Okay? Because think about it. Telling a lie is not the same. He did get fined for being misleading. But misleading and telling a lie and committing perjury is different, right? So, Paula Jones lawyers went after Clinton because they knew that if they could prove, they went after him for not just the harassment that Paula Jones went after. This was also a big deal because if they could show that he had also been involved with his intern, Monica Lewinsky, that lends more credence to the case, right? Because you can show a pattern. This guy's being intimate with multiple of his office workers, and he was in a position of power over them. He was also married. although quite honestly, I don't think his wife cared. So, but that's beside the point. Paula Jones' lawyers asked whether Clinton had had a sexual affair with Lewinsky. He said no. Okay. Now, knowing what we know now, was that a lie? No, it wasn't. His lawyers argue that Clinton believes his lawyers, notice there's an S at the end of the word lawyer, because when you get to that point, you've got multiple lawyers. His lawyers argue that Clinton believes sexual affair means sexual intercourse. If this is, and just for the folks, if you've got a kid on the call, we are going to be talking about some, I mean, this was all stuff that you can find in the public. This is front page newspaper stuff, but just for my own comfort, I'm just going to go ahead and tell you, we are going to be talking about what happened during this particular incident. And that does include talking about things like sexual intercourse. So if that makes you uncomfortable, please don't let your kids listen to the call. If they're under a certain age, you have to use your own judgment, of course. But this is a very, it's an adult topic, but it's, if the kid's old enough to know what sex is, this was front page news at the time, even back in the late 90s. And broadcast all over the TV too. So, so if this is indeed what Clinton was believing, because remember, if you believe it, it's not a lie, right? But you have to truly believe it. Then his testimony wasn't perjurious. Clinton's, and if I'm saying that word wrong, don't worry about correcting me. I say all words wrong. I'm from Kentucky. I barely speak English. So Clinton's defenders have pointed to several dictionaries to show that his definition is not completely eccentric. Now listen to that statement. Clinton's defenders pointed to several dictionaries to show that his definition is not completely eccentric. It's all about words, folks. Moreover, Monica Lewinsky herself said that Clinton told her that he believes sexual intercourse and sexual relations to be equivalent terms. I don't know if that was ever proven. But here's the thing. What does the word sex mean? So let's just assume for just a second that the average person's on the stand and they are asked, did you have sex with that man, that woman? Okay. So what we have to first understand is, what's the definition of sex? Let's look up the definition of sex in the old Black's Law Dictionary, because Black's Law is where we find the legal meanings of words, which is what's important in the public, right? So, definition of sex. I should have bookmarked it. My bad. There you go. Bill doesn't have sex bookmarked. That's probably a good thing. AWX. All right. Sex, the sum of the peculiarities of structure and function that distinguish a male from a female organism, the character of being male or female. So if someone says, did you have sex with that person? How can you answer that question using this definition? The sum of the peculiarities of structure and function that distinguish a male from a female, the character of being male or female. So, what are sexual relations? Because that's the phrase that we're talking about here, right? It's not in this dictionary, okay? So we can't go to Black's Law to figure that out. The only thing that's in Black's Law, 6th edition anyway, is sex, sexual abuse, and sexual harassment, okay? So if you're asked, did you have sex? What can you say? You know, it's easy to just take your definition and go with it, okay? Because in order to convict a person of perjury, it's going to have to be shown that they lied. So if somebody would come to me and say, hey, we found out that you engaged in intercourse with this woman, or they come to the female and say, we think you engaged in intercourse with this man. Well, yeah, I did, but you asked if I had sex. And according to my definition in Black's Law, this is the definition. Now, they may try to clarify definitions during a trial, right? So Paula Jones' lawyers did just that, okay? They handed Clinton a now famous definition of sexual relations. And I will tell you that sexual relations, the way they handed it to Bill Clinton, included a lot of different things, but it did not include the thing that I believe finally came out as being true. So you've got a lot of definitions of what sexual relations means, right? And they asked if he had these sort of relations with Lewinsky. And again, Bill Clinton said, no, I did not. Kenneth Starr, who was the lead prosecutor in this, asked Clinton the same question before a grand jury, and Clinton answered, "No, I didn't." And so Clinton's lawyers pointed out that this narrow definition did not include certain physical acts. And that was a really indirect way of saying the act that Bill Clinton actually probably engaged in. So this went on quite a while, of course. And during this whole thing, Bill Clinton was asked by Paula Jones' attorneys whether he was ever alone in a room with Monica Lewinsky. Clinton answered, "I don't recall." Later, Jones' attorneys asked whether it was possible that they were alone, even though Clinton had no specific memory of such an event. And Clinton answered, "Yes, there is a possibility we could have been alone." But does that prove he was alone? No. Clinton's lawyers said that the president did not testify that he was never alone with Miss Lewinsky. That's a true statement. He did say he didn't recall if he had been alone, and when asked if it was possible he could have been alone with her, he said yes. Now, I'm going to ask you another question. Think about this one for just a second. What does the word alone mean? And I know that a lot of people try to engage in common everyday parlance when they're speaking legalese. It doesn't work out too well because common everyday parlance changes quite often. Just ask any teenager what the word sick means nowadays, and you might get a surprise that it does not mean feeling ill. And those things change throughout time, right? But if you have a judge from the modern times talking to a judge from the 17th century, they could probably speak on basically the same level because legal language hasn't changed that much throughout the past few decades and centuries. So if I say, "Are you alone with so-and-so?" you assume that what I mean are you two alone together. But what is the definition of alone, right? And I'm not going to look that up in Black's Law. I'm just going to look that up on my computer. Alone. What does alone mean? Let's look up the definition of alone. Alone, having no one else present, on one's own, indicating that something is confined to the specific subject or recipient. But let's look at the main one there, having no one else present. Is it possible to be alone with someone? Legally, I don't think so. And we're not even getting into the whole name game. We're just talking about the way most folks would look at this in a court. So if you were to be asked, when Bill Clinton was asked, "Have you ever been alone with Monica?" he could have quite truthfully said, "I've never been alone with anyone." That would have been true. And other people would say, "Oh, well, he lied." No. The case went on, but they never really pinned him down with anything. And he's very, of course, being an attorney, he was very good at knowing, he obviously knew what perjury was, right? And he knew how to answer questions, okay? And I usually advise folks who are new not to answer questions. Why would you not answer questions? Because when you answer a question, two things happen. Number one, you are given jurisdiction to the asking party. Why would you answer a question if the other party didn't have power over you? Number two, you are stating when you give a statement, you have to prove it. Okay. And what does that mean? So let's say that I work for you and you say, "Bill, go out and wash the windows." So I go out and wash the windows and I come back in and you say, "Did you wash the windows?" And I say, "Yes." What happens if I can't prove that I washed the windows? I could be fired, right? Or at least, disciplined. So when you're answering questions, first off, what you need to ask yourself is, what gives the party that's asking the question the right or the jurisdiction to ask the question? Okay. So a lot of people most people are trained to automatically answer questions, right? They get a knock at the door. Someone's standing there, they appear professional, they tell them they may be with this government agency or that government agency. These questions start coming, and then the people that have been trained to ask those questions are very skilled in making you feel bad for not answering them. Such as, do you have anything in the vehicle that you shouldn't have? If you're being asked that question and you say, no, I don't, the next question could be, so can you prove it? And you're getting led further and further down the rabbit hole. My advice to you is to never answer questions unless you're in a spot where answering the questions will not be disadvantageous to you. And this is a very difficult thing to train ourselves out of because we are trained to answer questions, right? What happens in school? You get asked a bunch of questions, right? And we're constantly trained to answer those questions. And the whole thing about somebody like Bill Clinton is they understand how the game is played. They know that words have meanings. And if you look up many words, they have multiple meanings. I think the word run, R-U-N, has over 636 different definitions. It's one of the most definitions of any word in the English language, I believe. So when somebody asks you a question and you just assume what they mean and you run with it, you're making a very big mistake if the reason that the person is asking you questions is to try to develop a charge or case against you or to find out information that you would rather keep to yourself. So if you remember, Satan asked questions in Genesis. Let's look real quick and see what those questions are. So we got Genesis 3. And we're going to go to Bible Hub. And we're going to do some screen sharing real quick so that you guys can see the screen, because this is fairly important and it's very insightful. All right. Here we go. All right, we're going to go to the King James Version. We're going to go to Genesis 3. Let's try that one more time. And it takes just a second to bring it up. Here we go. Now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field. Subtle. What does that word mean, subtle? Let's look that word up real quick. He was very subtle. I have a feeling that we could apply that same word to a lot of attorneys. Subtil, subtle. It is the obsolete form of subtle, S-U-B-T-L-E, subtle, sly, artful, cunning, very cunning. That's what they called Bill Clinton, right? He was very slick Willie, Teflon Bill, nothing sticks to him. He was very cunning. He was very subtle, right? And he said unto the woman, yea, hath God said, ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden. So what did he do? He asked a question. And the woman said unto the serpent, we may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden. So what was her first mistake? Was her first mistake eating of the fruit of the tree? No. Her first mistake was engaging in commerce with the snake. And there's a lot of snakes out in commerce. But of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God hath said, ye shall not eat of it, neither shall ye touch it, lest ye die. And the serpent said unto the woman, ye shall not surely die. Now, was the serpent lying? No, because what God intended when he said you'll die if you eat the fruit was different than what definition the serpent used. So here we are in Genesis, one of the oldest writings known, and we're being given the same thing that we just read in the 1998, 1999 Bill Clinton sex scandal. Ye shall not surely die, for God doth know that in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. What's the good and evil that's being spoken about here? Commerce. We're being told specifically about commerce here, right? If you don't know, if you live in a world where there's no commerce, you don't know good and evil. What is commerce? Commerce is the exchange of goods, services, and ideals. If you live in a utopia, you do not need commerce because you have everything you need. It's only when we fell out of commerce or fell out of the garden and into commerce that we needed to trade for the things that we didn't have. And that is when we became as gods, God's lowercase g, right? So she got enticed into eating the fruit. Now, there's another section of scripture that I like to go to, and I think it is John 19, because that is where we are really given some very artful tutoring on how to answer questions. Hold on just a second. This is, maybe it's not John 19, maybe it's John 20. It's where Jesus gets questioned by Pontius Pilate. Just a second. Let's find it. Jesus questioned by Pontius Pilate. John 18 is a little off there. I should know my verses better. So John 18, Jesus before the high priest. So the high priest asked Jesus of his disciples and of his doctrine. So Jesus is standing before a high priest. I spoke openly to the world. I taught in every synagogue and temple where the Jews always resort, and in secret I have said nothing. No, Jesus says, I said nothing in secret. What are all these modern secret societies about? The Masons, Skull and Bones, they're all secret societies. They speak things in secret, right? Why askest thou me? Ask them which heard me. What have I said unto them? Behold, they know what I said. So if you want to know what I'm talking about, go ask the people I've been talking to, because I've been speaking openly. So they pull him in and try to basically question him, right? And when he had thus spoken, one of the officers which stood by him struck Jesus with the palm of his hand. And Jesus answered him, if I have spoken evil, bear witness of the evil. But if well, why smitest thou me? In other words, if I've spoken evil, tell me what evil I've done. But if I haven't done evil, why are you hitting me? All right. And then some things happen, and Jesus goes before Pontius Pilate. Now you got to remember that Israel was under the control of Rome at this time. I would say that a lot of different places are under the control of Rome now, but definitely the land that Jesus was in at this time. And Pontius Pilate was the leader of the area, and they tried to let the Jews handle things themselves. Why was the Romans there? Well, that's how they collected taxes, right? I mean, that's what happened when William Wallace and the King of England all butted heads. Is, they wanted the Scottish Highlanders, they wanted the Scots to pay tax, right? So that's what you do when you go in and you occupy a land. You get a tax, and it may not be that much of a tax, but it's still a tax. So Pilate went out to them and said, what accusation bring ye against this man? They answered him and said, if he were not a malefactor, we would not have delivered him up unto thee. That means, hey, he must have done something bad because he's here, right? Pilate tried to push it away. He didn't want no part of it. He said, judge him according to your law. And the Jews said, it's not lawful for us to put any man to death. So right there, that tells you what they were trying to do, right? That saying, if Jesus might be fulfilled, which he spoke, signifying death, what he should die. So Jesus already predicted this, okay? So finally, Pilate gets pushed into questioning Jesus, and he gets called in, and Jesus, he says, are you the king of the Jews? This is Pilate talking to Jesus. Jesus answered him, saying this thing of myself, or did others tell it thee of me? That is brilliant. Look at what he just said. Are you saying this, or did someone say it to you about me? Keep that answer in mind. That is brilliant. So if you were on the stand and an attorney were questioning you and he said something to you, would that not be a brilliant answer? Did you see this yourself or did someone say it of me? Oh, that's just good. So Pilate knows contracting. Okay, both men remain honorable here. Am I a Jew? Thine own nation and thy chief priest have delivered thee unto me. What hast thou done? So once again, there's a question, right? And he's trying to move Jesus into the position of debtor, because if he can move Jesus into the position of debtor, then he'll have jurisdiction over him. And Jesus answered, my kingdom is not of this world. So he's asking, are you a king? He says, yeah. Well, he's saying, I'm not a king. My kingdom isn't of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then my servants would fight that I should be delivered to the Jews, but not be delivered to the Jews. But now is my kingdom not from hence. So he still wasn't able to get pinned down. And Pilate then said, art thou a king then? And Jesus said, thou sayest that I am a king. To this end I was born, and for this cause I came into the world, that I should bear witness to the truth. Did he answer the question? Yes, but no. It's a beautiful answer. He speaks truth. It's very eloquent. And anyone who thinks that the Bible was written by a bunch of ignorant folks, this is amazingly detailed, intricate writing. Like, this is very educated writing. Pilate says, what is truth? But Pilate didn't wait for a response. He turned around and walked out. So it was a rhetorical question. They both remained honorable, and he said, I find no fault in this man at all. I find no fault at all in this man. What does that mean? Fault. It's a legal word. These people are speaking a very refined legal language, right? I'm going to stop sharing for a second. So, reading through scripture, you can find such instances over and over. I cannot imagine what it would have been like to have witnessed Jesus's other debates. So that brings us up to what you should be doing if you want to prepare yourself for this world, okay? Because what I have found is that no matter how much you train someone in something until they do it, it does not take. People have to actually go out and be tried and tested in order for them to be proven. And that is the difficult thing that I find when I'm trying to assist someone who's handling a legal matter. They want me to explain to them what to say and what to do in order to get a specific result. And the problem is that things are far more complex than that. Who could have explained to Jesus what to say before he went in talking to Pontius Pilate? I mean, he's part God, so he didn't need that. He's a very brilliant fellow. But at the same time, how do you learn how to answer questions like that? You know, it's not something that comes from sitting on the couch and reading about it. It's not something that comes from a YouTube video or a Zoom meeting. It's something that you have to both prepare yourself for and change your mindset. And the mindset that you have to have is very much that of a king. Kings were very learned folks, and queens. When I say king and queen, I'm talking about royalty. So what is it that we were just reading there in John 18? It's forensic debate. It's the ability to debate backwards and forth. And it is a shame that so many high schools and the educational system in general has moved away from debate teams. And that the ones that do have debate teams, the type of debate that they do has moved into something that's not very realistic, because it's very, like I've seen debates where people start talking, they get so many minutes to talk, and it's so flurried, they'll make 1,000 points, they'll speak 200 words, it's crazy. In order to debate, you have to be very slow, and you have to be, not slow, but you have to be very methodical. That's the word I'm looking for, methodical. And this occurs no matter who you're talking to. You could be talking to your own child. Go slow and take your words into consideration. Hasty words get people in trouble. And you do not have a time limit for answering a question unless someone has a gun to your head. There's nothing that says that you can't take 1, 2, 3 minutes to answer a question. You can have a piece of paper with you and take notes and write and just say, when somebody says, are you going to hurry up and answer? Well, I would very much like to place some importance upon my answer because it seems like you are placing a lot of importance upon the question. So can you give me a moment to make sure that I'm going to give you the answer that you deserve? You know, a lot of people think that if they don't hurry up and answer, that it's a sign that they're lying or perjuring themselves. And that's not true. You have to be very careful when your words can result in an arrest or a conviction or some other negative thing to you. What's the other thing that you should probably study? Logical fallacies. Okay, because when you're being put on the hot seat, there's going to be tricks that are going to be pulled. And if you understand what the logical fallacies are, it becomes easier to spot when you're being backed into a corner or when an argument is simply going, when the person who's asking the question is being very disingenuous or very manipulative. It's like that question, have you moved away from beating your wife more than once a week? Or, do you beat your wife once a week or 3 times a week? It's making an assumption before the question is even asked, right? So there is a book that I would recommend if you want to learn about fallacies. And this is something that should be part of everyone's basic education. Let me find it. Here we go. If you can see my screen. This is a pocket guide to logic and faith. It's inexpensive. It's less than $10. It was written by a guy named Jason Lisle. I don't agree with everything Jason Lisle teaches, but a lot of the stuff he teaches is very sound, and this book is a wonderful book. Discerning Truth in Logical Arguments, okay? And it's written as logic and faith, but this is a very concise list of logical fallacies. And if you can learn the basic fallacies, and there's about 15 or 20 that are used the most, although there's dozens of them, it's a very enjoyable thing to learn. You need to understand the fallacies, okay? The next thing you need to understand is the words, all right? So when somebody asks you a question, if it is very important for you to have a meeting of the minds, then I would suggest that you get your definitions straight. If you are trying to be a wily witness, then it might be better for you to assume your own definition and go with it. That way you can't be caught up into any trap. Can't get your tail into a crack. When you understand forensic debate, when you understand logical fallacies, and when you start getting some discernment, it builds confidence. And when you build confidence, you'll find that you're no longer panicking when you're talking to someone. It's very unnerving. There's a reason that over the years, various military types have dressed the way they do. Let's take the German Reich. It's no coincidence that the German soldiers were dressed very impressively because it was very intimidating. When you talk to a police officer, what are they wearing? They're wearing this belt with all the tools. They have the guns. They have the asp. They have usually a crisp uniform. They're wearing the chloroform shoes that are quite shiny. It's meant to be, they'll say professional, but it's got more than one use. It's also meant to be intimidating. I did a lot of interview and interrogations when I was in the military and afterwards when I was working for various federal law enforcement agencies and various federal intelligence agencies. I probably did about 5,000 interview and interrogations during my day. And I've studied a lot of different interview techniques. One of those techniques is the Reed technique of interview and interrogation. And it's a very fun thing to study because they teach you a lot of stuff. They teach you how to set up the room. And one of the things you do when you set up the room, it's a very small room. It's a small interview room. People are coming in there voluntarily. If you're going into a Reed interview room, although this can be used by police and military intelligence and other agencies. And you don't ever block the route out of the room because you don't want the person you're questioning to think that they're under any kind of hostage or arrest situation or something, because that can be very bad for your case. But generally, one of the things I like to do when I'm preparing the room is I make sure that my seat sits higher than theirs, because that gives me a little bit of a tactical advantage so that I can look down on them. That makes me more imposing. I always like to be dressed very well, wearing a suit and tie, and be very professional looking. I knew how to disarm the person that I was talking to. I could use the Southern accent, or I could drop the Southern accent. It's become a little bit harder for me to drop that accent now because, well, I've spent a lot of time in my state over the past few years. But back then, I spent a lot of time working to remove the accent because there were times that it was advantageous and there were times that it was not. If I was talking to someone from a large city and I immediately opened up with a Southern accent, then it was probably not going to do me very well because they were probably going to think less of my intellect. That's a sad state of affairs, but it's just the way people are built. So I learned to drop the accent. The other thing is talking to people was so comfortable to me. Asking questions was so comfortable. And when I'm comfortable and the other party is uncomfortable, that's good for me if I'm trying to get information out, because it's easier to lead them around. I'm already in charge of the situation because I'm coming in from a position of authority, right? But it also enabled me to control them better. And that is what all your interview and interrogation is about. And anytime someone from a position of authority is talking to you, it is an interrogation, period. Okay. If you're on the side of the road, what's the cop doing? He's standing there looking down at you. I used to drive an F-350, and it was really cool because I got pulled over a lot. I never got tickets, but I was always driving around looking for addresses. I was always perpetually lost. And even when I had GPS, it still wasn't all that much better because, unless you know an area, it's pretty easy to pass up your exit and that sort of thing. And so I was usually driving like I was lost, especially when I was in a city. I mean, not so much on the interstate, but if I'm trying to find a parking spot with an F-350 in downtown DC, there's a pretty good chance I'm going to break a traffic law. So I ended up talking to a lot of police officers. I've been pulled over by Air Force OSI, CIA Uniform Police, NSA. I've been stopped by multiple embassy officials. I've been pulled over by the FBI, sheriff's departments, police, you name it. Why? Because I was driving around all these entities, these headquarters and stuff. And sometimes I just pull over to make a phone call, and next thing you know, I'm talking to a police officer. Well, in the F-350, they always had to look up at me. It changed things somewhat. I could feel it. I'm very in tune to the way other people feel. And when they had to look up at me, it was a little bit different of a story versus being in a car or a small truck when they're looking down at you. So keep in mind that these tactics are all known by these people who are asking you questions. They're trained in it. I took several courses in this stuff, okay? And that course material is open and out there for you. You can find it, but you don't have to go pay big money for the courses. Most everything's on the internet nowadays. So there's specific ways that people who are telling the truth talk versus people who are lying. And one of the things that the Reid technique of interview and interrogation did is it enabled you to interview a bunch of folks and determine which one was lying. So let's say you're interviewing 20 tellers from a bank because someone took $5,000 one day out of one of the tills or from the safe. The cameras were out that day, so the bank has a contract with Reid, and when these employees signed on, they agreed that if there was ever a matter that the employer deemed it for them to do so, that they would go talk to the Reid folks in order to keep their job. So the Reid interviewer would talk to maybe 20 people that day. And he would ask particular questions. And one of the questions that he might ask is, what do you think should happen to the person who took this money? Well, an honest person would usually say, well, I think they should go to jail. I mean, stealing is wrong. That's a lot of money. The employer trusted them with the money. Somebody took it. Whoever took it, they should go to jail. A person who took the money might answer something along the lines of, well, it depends. Maybe why did they take the money? Maybe their kid's sick and they needed it for medical bills. Maybe their family's going hungry and they needed the money. So maybe you should just do a little bit more digging and figure out why they took it, right? And during these interview courses that I took, they would show us hundreds of these interviews, and it became laughably easy to pick out the one who was lying. I mean, it was almost like they came in holding a flag. And then what the interviewer does is he would leave. He would come back in with a thick file once he found the one that was lying, the one he believed was lying. And there were multiple of these questions. There might be 6, 7, 8. And someone who's lying is going to pop on several of them. And then you set the folder down on the table, and you just start talking. And what you're doing here is multifaceted. First off, you're not ever going to stop talking. In the Reid technique, you continue to talk. You may say something like, well, Joe, it's pretty obvious by our investigation that you're the one that took the money. Okay, but you don't stop there. The last thing you want to do is stop right there. You keep going, and you try to find a theme at that point. The theme is you try to figure out why they took the money. Okay. And so, does any of this sound familiar yet? Like a police officer on the side of the road? Do you know why I pulled you over? Now, isn't that an open-ended question? Huh? So you may say something like, now, Joe, I know that you took the money. We're not worried about that. But today you're going to have to walk out of this room. You're going to have to face your family. You're going to have to face your boss. You're going to have to face your coworkers. And we need to know why you took the money. I need to be able to explain this to them. And then you just keep talking and you try to find the theme. You read the body language and you keep talking. Okay. And eventually you'll get that body language feedback to the point where you know that the person's getting ready to talk. Because, and if you've got the wrong person, you'll know it quickly because all hell will break loose usually. If you hit the wrong person, and I watched several videos of this, and I've done it myself. If you get the wrong person and you come in and you say, I know you took the money, usually that reaction is something very energetic. People have yelled, they've stood up, what the hell are you talking about? They'll curse, they'll scream. That's not always the case. Sometimes they're just shocked and they'll be like, what the heck? No, I didn't take any money. You're out of your head. Most often than not, though, the guilty person would do something like this. They would go, you get the big sigh, you get the break in the body posture. Okay. And at that point, you're also trained to read body language. And the body language, like I'm sitting here right now, I have my ankles crossed and I can cross my arms. This is a very closed posture. If I was interviewing me, I would know that until I get these arms uncrossed and get my legs uncrossed, that I'm not going to get a very good result. I have to find the right theme of why this person did what they did in order to get them to talk. And a lot of your attorneys understand some of this stuff a little bit. When you're on the stand, that is a form of interview and interrogation, right? It's done by police officers. They do have interview rooms. It's done by CPS agents. But the very first thing you always have to ask yourself is, by what jurisdiction or authority am I being questioned, right? And I don't think the public does it wrong that often. I think they very often do it right. They do a very admirable job. I've been in that seat. But we also need to live in a society. I don't think we have a bad system. I've written articles about this, or I did the other day. We don't have a bad system. The problem is the ignorance of the people. We get the government we want. We get the government we ask for. We get the government we deserve. I am not anti-government. I am anti-stupid people. There's no reason for anyone in this culture, in this society, in this day and age to be ignorant. We walk around with these things in our hand. We can find this information. It's all out. Okay. So with the read technique, though, keep on that theme until you get that person to open up. And when you get them at the right point, that's when you start moving in a little carefully, start getting a little closer. And at some point, you may find it is just the right time to say, that's why you took the money, right, Joe? You took the money because your kid is sick, right? You took it for your kid. And once you get them to agree, of course, you fill out a statement. You might fill it out. You might have them fill it out. Depends on what you're looking for. Have them sign it. Once they sign that statement, you're good. You have them. However, there have been a lot of cases where folks have signed statements, affidavits, where they have taken the guilt for something and they didn't do it. There's a lot of those cases out there. It is possible, and that's why we have laws to protect folks. One of those laws is the Fifth Amendment. You have a right not to say anything, okay? And usually, if you're talking, you're doing yourself a disservice. Never talk because you're trying to prove that you're innocent. Don't do it. You can't do it. You cannot prove that you're innocent. Only thing you can do is give folks more information to help them prove you're guilty. Okay? So it helps to be able to answer questions like a king. What do I mean by that? So let's just assume that a king is walking down the sidewalk and he doesn't have his court with him. He's by himself for some weird reason. He's walking down the sidewalk. He's going to the post office. and someone steps out in front of that king or that queen, and they say, "Stop, where are you going?" Now, what just happened right there? They didn't get assaulted, but there is a word that fits what just happened. They got accosted. ACCOSTED, accosted. Now, if I walk by you, and I'm a police officer, and I say, "How you doing?" that's not accosting you. But if I do it aggressively, and I do something else, I say, "Where are you going? What's your name? Where did you come from?" That's accosting you. I've had that happen. I've been moving down a sidewalk and had a cop say, "Where are you going?" And the reply I like to use is, "Why are you accosting me?" Now that gets a step backwards. Immediately the power dynamics change. The person that's asking me the questions knows that I'm not an easy target. I'm not just going to fold over and start giving any information that's asked. It's usually not in your best interest at any point in time. So if a king's walking down the sidewalk and someone steps out in front of the king and says, "Where are you going?" Stop, where are you going? Will a king say, "I'm going to the post office. Can I please pass and go on about my way?" Mm-mm. The king is going to act as a king. And that is why they call asking questions acting as king, asking questions. Get it? So a king may say something like, "Who are you and by what authority do you come before me?" Now that sounds a little bit more like the way Jesus answered the questions, right? Because it's a little bit more, as the Supreme Court put it, wily. And there's nothing wrong with being wily, okay? A lot of people think that government agents cannot lie to you. It's not true. As a matter of fact, when I joined U.S. Army counterintelligence course, one of the things they did at the very beginning of the course is they came in with several instructors. They had us all close our eyes, and they said, "If there is anyone in here who feels that they have a moral, religious, or ethical reason as to why they cannot tell a lie in the course of their duties to accomplish the goal or mission in their job," something like that, "raise your hand." But they told us that none of us could open our eyes, so they didn't want us to see who else raised their hand. And I had not taken a good enough survey of the room to know if there was any fewer people in the room than when I closed my eyes and then I opened them. But I am sure that anyone who raised their hand was not in that course very much longer, because U.S. government knows that we needed to lie in order to do our job. But if you lie and you are a citizen, then usually that's a crime. So you don't want to do it. Just avoid it. It's always better to tell the truth anyway. I never liked lying. Even when I was doing it in the course of my work, I always tried to avoid lying. Sometimes it was unavoidable because of the way we did things. But yes, cops can lie to you. They very much can. And if you're in a group of folks and you ask, "Is anyone here a cop?" Because if you are, you have to tell me. No, they don't have to tell you. Don't believe that. Okay. There's no reason they have to tell you. All right. They can lie in the course of their job. You just can't lie to them. So your best bet is to learn how to answer questions like a king, the way Jesus instructed us to answer questions, the way Jesus instructed us to talk. For some reason, in the modern churchian community, modern churchian culture, there's this ideal that whenever a government agent asks something of you or says something to you, you have to do exactly what they say, blurt out the truth, pay what's owed, all that. That's not true, and that's not taught anywhere in Scripture. Okay? The only part of Scripture that you hear the politicians constantly pounding on that they'll pull out real quick is Romans 13, Romans 12, the abeyance of civil authorities. Okay? And I'm not going to jump into that part of Scripture right now, but that's not what it means. It doesn't mean that anytime someone who is with the government says jump, you have to jump. It's not what that's about. As a matter of fact, most of the apostles or disciples spent time in prison, spent time in jail. Jesus was executed by the governing authorities because he wouldn't shut up. And he knew that it was coming. That was part of the prophecy. It was part of the whole plan. However, we're told in school constantly, don't lie, don't lie, don't lie. And I agree with that, don't lie. But that doesn't mean you need to blurt out everything. And people say, well, what have you got to hide? Well, we don't mail our letters in clear envelopes. We don't put clear curtains on our windows. Privacy is something that we have decided in this particular nation, in this time, in this culture, in this age that we deserve. And there have been many things that have eroded that And for the most part, I don't worry too much about privacy because I understand what the powers that be, their capabilities are. And they can do some pretty serious stuff as far as watching communications and all that stuff. So I just don't worry about it. You know, it's better to play the chess game smart than to always be in fear about what may be heard and all this stuff. So I don't agree with the paranoia. I don't agree with worrying about whether somebody's reading your emails or anything like that. The fact is that the whole system is very complex. And that's a good thing because the more complex it is, the harder it's going to be to pin down a wily witness. And that's what you want to be. You want to be the wily witness. You want to be the one who has a little bit more, well, I think it's said best in scripture. Jesus said, it says, I send you forth I send you forth. Oh, crap. How does it go? The part of my brain that retrieves things sometimes doesn't work. Behold, I send you forth as sheep in the midst of wolves. Be ye therefore wise as serpents and harmless as doves. Now, wise as serpents and harmless as doves. Does that mean that we need to be just like Satan? No. It means we need to be as wise as Satan. We need to be as wise as a serpent, but we also need to be harmless as doves. It does no good to try to resolve your problems with force. I don't recommend it. It usually doesn't work out very well. It's part of the wide path to hell. Vengeance is the Lord's. Don't try to get your own vengeance. Now, that doesn't mean you don't perfect a claim, but in this modern day and age, we live very much like the king's court. I've mentioned the book, The 48 Laws of Power, before by a guy named Green, I think Brian Green, I'm not real sure, but it's 48 Laws of Power. And he describes it perfectly. In the time of the king's court, everyone wanted to be close to the king. So people were always vying to be in the presence of the king and to be in the know and to be used by the king's hand, you know. But that created a lot of politics. And where did the king take his court? The king takes his court everywhere. So there were a lot of folks around the king all the time. I feel sorry for them. Those guys literally did not wipe their own butts. And when you were in the king's court, there were a lot of other people who who were jealous, were envious if you had the ear of the king. And overt moves of force, violence, and power were frowned upon. It could get you beheaded. So you used words, you used strategy. And that's very much the system that we're in today. Overt violent behaviors are frowned upon. If you're going to get your way, you need to be as wise as a serpent, but harmless as a dove. So that wraps up my library. We're at 9:01, and that was a fun little bit on wordplay. I hope the folks that get to listen to this later get inspired to start checking into some of this stuff, to learning how to debate, to reading scripture and reading the spots where Jesus and the disciples answer questions and how folks did it right and folks did it wrong. But it's all laid out there for us. There's tons of resources. There's that book by Jason Lisle that you can get on Amazon called Logic. I'll put that up later. I think I closed it out. There is lots of books out there on debate. There's lots of videos out there of police stops. More and more people carrying cameras, and we get a lot of recordings and examples of where people did things right. They're kind of rare though. We get a whole lot of examples of where people did things wrong. And I've learned that I don't want to move too far into too advanced stuff too quick. I'm not a very advanced guy myself. I like to keep things simple. And if it's super, super complicated, I don't like to do it. I just soon keep things simple. And let's face it, most of the time when people enter into the system, being an arrest, a CPS agent taking their kids, whatever, it starts with the words that are exchanged between the people. And if you can cut things off right then, it becomes far easier Because the further into the system you get, the harder it is to get extracted. It's like walking out into quicksand. The deeper you go and the more you sink. Is it impossible at any time? No, but there can come a time when you've just got a finger stuck up and you got a limited amount of time before you suffocate. So the further you get along, the harder it is to fix it. That doesn't mean it's impossible to fix it. I was recently contacted by someone who was a few days away from a sentencing hearing. And they asked, can you help me? I would love to. I don't think I can. The amount that I would have to the amount of energy to put into that would just have been enormous. And there are no easy answers to fixing problems. There rarely is. But if you nip it in the bud early, it becomes a lot easier, right? It's like cutting off the tip of your finger. I mean, if you can stop the bleeding quick, you're probably not going to have more than just some minor pain, right? Or maybe some major pain, but nothing nowhere near like what's going to happen if you bleed out and you almost die. And you have to get blood transfusions and all that good jazz, right? I mean, it's like a sickness. You got some kind of infection in your body. The longer you take to fix it, the harder it is to fix. So let's start at the basics over the next couple calls, and let's learn how to fix these things in the very beginning. That way, we're not trying to fix grand jury indictments. So next call, I think what we might do is watch a video or two and disseminate and take apart what folks do and what they did right, what they did wrong. And otherwise, I hope you all have a good night. From here on out, if you guys have any questions, anybody listening to these videos, if you have any questions, feel free to post them, and that way we can have an answer prepared. But I'm going to go ahead and stop recording and just chat for a second. If anybody has a question, you can throw it at us. And if it's something we need to broadcast later, we can.